I came home early that day, earlier than anyone expected. I should have been at the construction site until sundown, checking on the final stages of a townhouse development my team had been working on for months. Instead, a delivery mishap had cut my day short, so I thought I'd surprise my family, maybe have dinner together for the first time in weeks. As I stepped inside, the house felt different. Not silent, but not the usual noise of Olivia and Ethan arguing over the TV remote or Lauren's favorite classical playlist humming softly in the background. Instead, there were voices, laughter, lighthearted and carefree. It wasn't theirs. I followed the sound to the backyard. And there he was, Derek Marshall, the real estate developer Lauren had been raving about for months. He was sitting in one of our patio chairs, a drink in his hand, looking as if he owned the place. Lauren sat close beside him, leaning in as she laughed at something he'd said. Olivia and Ethan were there too, hanging on to his every word. I stood frozen in the doorway. Derek turned to say something to Ethan, handing him a set of keys. Ethan's face lit up, and seconds later, he sprinted toward the driveway. Olivia followed, squealing, "Wait, I want to try first." My kids were running to Derek's sleek sports car, eager to take turns driving it down the quiet suburban streets. Lauren glanced toward the house then, spotting me in the doorway. Her smile faltered, but only briefly. She stood, brushing her hands down her designer jeans as if smoothing out the situation. "Michael, you're home early," she said, her voice a little too casual. "Guess I am," I replied. My voice sounded distant to my own ears. I looked back toward the driveway, where my children, our children, were climbing into another man's car, cheering like it was Christmas morning. I didn't ask the questions racing through my head. Instead, I nodded toward Derek, who was standing now, his smile wide and confident. "And you must be Derek." "Michael." "Finally," he said, extending his hand. "Lauren's told me all about you. I've been meaning to connect. You're an architect, right? I have so much respect for what you do." His grip was firm, calculated, but his tone carried a slight edge, like a man who thought he was better at my own game. I released his hand, giving him nothing more than a polite nod. "What's this?" I asked, gesturing toward the driveway. "Oh, just some fun," Derek said with a chuckle. "Kids these days, right?" Olivia and Ethan are naturals behind the wheel. "Gotta admit, Michael, they've got your precision." Lauren stepped forward, her hand on my arm. "He's just being nice, Michael." Derek's been helping Olivia with some college plans. She mentioned wanting to study fashion design, and he offered to connect her with some of his contacts. "Isn't that great?" I stared at her for a moment. She looked excited, almost proud, like this was some grand favor Derek had done for us. But I couldn't ignore the way her hand lingered on his shoulder when she spoke, or the glint in his eye as he met my gaze, challenging me, silently staking his claim. Before I could respond, Ethan and Olivia returned, breathless and grinning. "Dad!" Ethan shouted, waving the car keys. "Did you see that? Derek let me drive. He says I've got a natural talent for handling luxury cars. Way cooler than your old truck. No offense." None taken, I wanted to say, but the words lodged in my throat as Olivia chimed in. "He's so generous, Dad. Like, it's not even his job to help us, but he's just involved, you know? Involved. A word I'd always hoped would describe me, if only I had more time to give them." Derek clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Your kids are great, Michael. Really. You got a solid foundation here." Foundation. The word hung in the air like a challenge, like he was testing whether I'd noticed the cracks he was helping create. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I couldn't shake the image of my kids looking at him with admiration, laughing at his jokes, and dismissing me like an afterthought. By the time Derek left, his departure as casual as if he were part of the family, Lauren acted as if nothing had happened. "You were awfully quiet tonight," she said, standing in the kitchen as I cleaned up the mess they'd left behind. "Just tired," I lied. I scrubbed harder at the pan in my hand, letting the conversation die. But in my chest, something had shifted, a hollow space where my certainty used to be. I had built this house, this life, with my own hands, worked late nights, put in every ounce of effort to make it solid. And yet, it felt as if someone had moved in while I wasn't looking, tearing it apart from the inside. That night, as I lay in bed beside Lauren, who fell asleep too easily, I stared at the ceiling. I didn't know what was happening yet, Not completely, but I could feel the cracks widening. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek's presence wasn't just casual. He wasn't just a family friend who had overstepped his boundaries. Something more was happening, and I was the only one who didn't seem to be in on it. Ethan and Olivia were at breakfast, heads buried in their phones. Lauren sipped coffee across the table, looking effortlessly put together as usual. She didn't meet my gaze, even when I asked how her day looked. Ethan broke the silence. "Hey, Dad, do you think I could get $50? Derek's taking us to that steakhouse downtown tonight. He says it's like essential to learn about fine dining." I stopped mid-chew. "Derek's taking you to dinner?" "Yeah," Olivia chimed in, not looking up from her phone. "It's part of, learning about life. Networking and stuff. He says knowing how to navigate high-end spaces is important for success. And I suppose Derek's footing the bill for all of this?" I asked, setting my fork down. Ethan shrugged. "I don't know. Does it matter? I mean, it's not like you'd take us to a place like that." "No offense, Dad, but you're more of a burgers and beer kind of guy." Olivia laughed, but the sound grated on me. Lauren, to her credit, shot Ethan a warning look. "Ethan, that's enough." "It's fine," I said, though it wasn't. I stood and cleared my plate, ignoring the tension in the air. "I hope you remember Derek's generosity when the bill comes due." I left the kitchen without waiting for a response, heading for my office. It was time to stop second-guessing myself. I sat at my desk, booted up my computer, and started searching. It didn't take long to find Derek's profile, a public persona crafted to perfection. Photos of him shaking hands with developers, standing beside luxury cars, and cutting ribbons at high-profile openings filled his website and social media. But what caught my attention wasn't the polished image. It was the gaps. No mentions of his previous projects. No client reviews older than 2 years. His LinkedIn showed a string of short stints at various companies, each ending abruptly. And then there was the gossip. A few scattered mentions in industry forums of shady deals, unpaid debts, and lawsuits settled quietly out of court. My gut churned. Derek wasn't just a charmer. He was a con man, and somehow, he had wormed his way into my home. Later that afternoon, as I walked to my truck to head to a site meeting, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Ethan. "Hey, Dad, just a heads up, Derek's picking us up after school tomorrow for some college tours. Says it's good to start thinking about my options early. Can you send over the college fund info so he can help plan?" My hands tightened around the phone. College fund info? Derek had no business talking about my son's future, let alone involving himself in the money I'd spent years putting aside. I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the bank. The teller was polite but firm. "Your accounts are secure, Mr. Carter, but I see there have been some withdrawals from the joint account over the past few months." "Are you saying these weren't authorized?" "What kind of withdrawals?" I asked. She turned the monitor toward me. There they were, charges I didn't recognize. Dinners at upscale restaurants, charges from luxury boutiques, and a deposit to a brokerage account I didn't own. My chest tightened as I scrolled further down. The numbers weren't massive yet, but they added up, and the pattern was clear. Lauren had been siphoning money. That evening, I waited until the kids were in bed. Lauren was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, her perfectly polished nails tapping lightly on the screen. "Lauren," I said, stepping into the room. She looked up, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. "What is it?" I didn't waste time. "Why is money disappearing from the joint account?" Her face froze for just a second, long enough for me to know the answer, but then she forced a laugh. "Disappearing? Michael, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about charges at restaurants I've never heard of, boutiques I've never shopped at, and a deposit into an account I didn't open." "What's going on?" Her smile faltered. "You're being paranoid. Those are probably just mix-ups. You know how banks can be." "I talked to the bank," I said, my voice sharp. "These weren't mix-ups, Lauren. So tell me, are these charges for you, or are they for Derek?" The room went still. Her hand clenched around her phone, and her lips parted as if she wanted to deny it, but no words came. Finally, she stood, brushing past me, without a word, and heading up the stairs. I let her go, though the silence in her wake was deafening. Upstairs, I heard the sound of a door shutting and the lock clicking into place. That night, I didn't sleep. My mind raced with memories of the past few months. Lauren's distracted smiles, the way she dismissed my questions about her day, the way Olivia and Ethan had started treating me like an afterthought. Derek wasn't just taking my wife. He was taking my family. The cracks weren't just widening anymore. They were threatening to bring the whole house down. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Lauren's silence, the kids' admiration for Derek, the missing money. It was all connected. I didn't have the luxury of anger or self-pity anymore. I needed a plan. After Lauren left the house for her morning yoga class, I headed to the garage where I kept my personal files locked in a steel cabinet. Among them were records of our joint finances, my business accounts, and, most importantly, details about the college funds I'd spent years building for Olivia and Ethan. I pulled out the folders and reviewed them carefully. Everything seemed intact, but I wasn't taking chances. I called my attorney, Amanda Bailey. She'd helped me set up the funds when Olivia was born and had been a trusted ally through years of business dealings. "Amanda, I need to protect the kids' college funds," I told her. Her tone sharpened immediately. "What's going on, Michael?" I told her everything. Derek, the missing money, the influence he seemed to have over my kids, and the growing suspicion that Lauren was planning something bigger than an affair. When I finished, there was a long pause. "This isn't just about an affair," Amanda finally said. "If Derek's involved, he could be looking to secure leverage over your assets. You need to act quickly. We'll lock down the college funds, but I suggest securing your business assets as well. Do you have separate accounts for Carter Designs?" "Of course," I said. "Lauren's never had access to those." "Good. Keep it that way." And Michael, start documenting everything. That afternoon, I stayed in my office, combing through the financial records. By evening, I had a thick file of evidence. Screenshots of bank statements, Lauren's suspicious withdrawals, and a timeline of every interaction Derek had with my kids. When Ethan and Olivia came home from school, I was ready. They walked through the door, laughing about something, and immediately went upstairs. I gave it a few minutes, then followed. I knocked on Ethan's door first. He opened it, still grinning, but his face fell when he saw my expression. "What's up, Dad?" "We need to talk," I said, stepping inside. He sighed, flopping onto his bed. "Let me guess. This is about Derek." "You could say that," I replied, sitting down in the desk chair. "What exactly has he been telling you?" Ethan shrugged. "Nothing bad. He just gets it, you know? He's not always on my case about working hard or being responsible. He says it's about connections, about knowing the right people. And he's right. He's helping Olivia with college, and he's not helping you." I interrupted, my voice firmer than I intended. "He's manipulating you. Do you even know anything about him?" Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Derek's successful. He drives a better car than you, lives in a bigger house. And how do you think he got those things?" I leaned forward. "By borrowing money from people like me, by cutting corners and making promises he can't keep. Derek isn't successful, Ethan. He's a fraud." "That's not true," Ethan shot back, standing now. "You're just jealous because Derek's actually around. He listens to us, supports us, instead of burying himself in work all the time." The words hit harder than I expected, but I kept my voice steady. "He's not supporting you, Ethan. He's buying your loyalty. And when he's done using you, he'll move on to someone else, just like he's done before." Ethan scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't get it. You never do." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I sat there for a moment, the air thick with frustration and regret. Then I got up and went to Olivia's room. Olivia was on her bed, headphones in, scrolling through her phone. When I knocked, she waved me in but didn't look up. "Can we talk?" I asked. "Sure," she said, not bothering to remove her headphones. "Olivia," I said sharply, and she finally pulled them off. "This is serious." "Okay," she said, sitting up. "What's so serious?" "It's about Derek," I began, but she cut me off with a groan. "Not this again," she said, rolling her eyes. "What is it with you and Derek? He's not the bad guy you think he is. And how do you know that?" I asked. "Because he bought you dinner? Because he told you what you wanted to hear about college?" "He's helping me," she said, her tone defensive. "Unlike you. Every time I bring up fashion school, you tell me it's unrealistic or that I need to work my way up. Derek gets it. He believes in me." Olivia, I said, keeping my voice calm, Derek doesn't care about you. He cares about making himself look good. He's not investing in your future. He's trying to undermine our family. That's not true, she snapped. Maybe if you weren't so stuck in your ways, you'd see that. She turned away, putting her headphones back on, effectively ending the conversation. I left the room feeling more alone than ever. That night, I didn't confront Lauren. I didn't need to. The way she avoided me, the way she barely looked at me during dinner, said everything. She was waiting for something, some moment to strike. But I wouldn't give her the chance. As the house fell quiet, I sat in my office, staring at the pile of evidence I'd gathered. Derek had stolen more than my wife's attention. He'd stolen my children's trust. And I was going to get it back. I spent the next week gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing for a battle. If Derek thought he could take my family, my hard-earned money, and the respect I'd built over years of work, he was wrong. Lauren became more distant as the days passed. She left early in the mornings, claiming errands or yoga, and came back late, her excuses rehearsed and hollow. Olivia and Ethan were glued to their phones, their conversations laced with Derek's name. Every time I heard them talk about him, my jaw tightened. They didn't see it yet, but Derek was pulling the strings. One night, I overheard Ethan in his room. He was on a video call with Derek, the light from his laptop casting shadows on the walls. "Yeah, Dad just doesn't get it," he said, his tone dismissive. "He's so old school, like everything's about hard work and sacrifice." "Derek, you're right. Networking is the future." I leaned against the wall outside his door, my fists clenched. I didn't want to hear it, but I couldn't walk away. "It's okay, Ethan," Derek's smooth voice replied. "Your dad means well, but he's stuck in the past. You're different. You see the bigger picture. That's why you've got potential." Potential. Derek was feeding my son the same lies he'd fed Lauren. And Ethan was eating it up. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. I'd come home early again, this time with intent. I had a folder in my truck packed with evidence. A timeline of Derek's fraud, financial records showing Lauren's misuse of our funds, and screenshots from his social media accounts that painted a picture of manipulation. It was time to confront them all. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I found them in the living room. Lauren, Olivia, and Ethan, all sitting on the couch with Derek, laughing like a picture-perfect family. Derek had a drink in his hand, and Olivia was showing him something on her phone. They didn't notice me at first. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice cutting through their laughter. Derek was the first to respond, his face breaking into that smug, practiced smile. "Michael, good to see you. We were just talking about—" "Save it," I said, stepping closer. "This isn't a social visit, Derek. It's time we had a conversation." The room fell silent. Lauren looked at me with something between guilt and defiance. Olivia and Ethan exchanged uneasy glances. "What's your problem, Dad?" Ethan finally said, "Derek's been nothing but helpful. You're acting like he's the enemy." "He is the enemy," I said, locking eyes with Derek. "You just don't see it yet." "Michael, stop," Lauren said, standing. "You're overreacting. Derek's been helping the kids with their futures. He's doing what you haven't had time for." That hit harder than it should have. I steadied myself, then dropped the folder onto the coffee table. "What's this?" Derek asked, still smiling, though I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. "Evidence," I said, "of who you really are." I opened the folder and began laying out the documents. Bank records showing Lauren's withdrawals. A list of lawsuits Derek had quietly settled. Emails between Derek and his former business partners, accusing him of theft and fraud. Olivia and Ethan leaned forward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to confusion. Lauren's face turned pale. "This is ridiculous," Derek said, though his smile was gone now. "Michael, you've clearly misunderstood." "Misunderstood?" I cut him off, my voice rising. "You've been using my wife, my kids, my money, my family, to prop up your lies. You're a con man, Derek. A fraud, and I have the proof." Ethan stood, his face red. "Dad, stop it. Derek's done more for us in a few months than you have in years. He actually cares." I turned to my son, my voice heavy with anger, but also sadness. Ethan, he doesn't care. He's playing you. He's telling you what you want to hear because it benefits him. I've spent my entire life building something real for this family, and you're throwing it away for a guy who can't even keep his own life together. Olivia looked at Derek, her voice shaking. Is this true? Are you lying to us? Derek hesitated, his usual confidence faltering. Olivia, Lauren stepped in, her voice rising. Michael, enough. You don't understand. Derek's given me something I haven't had in years. Attention, appreciation. He listens. He's not like you, always busy, always working. I stared at her, my heart sinking. You think he's different? He's the same as every other comment out there. When he's done using you, he'll move on, just like he's done before. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Derek finally stood, brushing off his pants as if nothing had happened. Michael, he said, his voice calm but cold, you can believe whatever you want. But you're wrong about me, and you're going to lose your family because of it. He turned to leave, but I stepped in front of him. No, you don't get to walk away from this. Get out of my house and don't come back. Derek looked at Lauren, but she avoided his gaze. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. He glanced at Olivia and Ethan, who were both staring at him, their expressions torn. Finally, he left. When the door closed, the tension in the room remained. Lauren sat down, burying her face in her hands. Olivia and Ethan stood frozen, as if the weight of the truth was sinking in. I need to think, Lauren said, her voice muffled. Then she got up and went upstairs without another word. Olivia turned to me, tears in her eyes. Is all of that true? About Derek? Yes, I said. Every word. She nodded slowly, then followed Lauren upstairs. Ethan stayed behind, staring at the folder on the table. His anger had faded, replaced by something like regret. I didn't know, he said quietly. I thought he was trying to help. I sat down beside him, my voice softer now. I know, Ethan. He's good at making people believe that. But you've got to understand, success doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from hard work, from building something real. Ethan didn't reply, but he didn't leave either. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. Lauren didn't come downstairs for the rest of the evening. Olivia and Ethan were quiet, keeping to themselves, as if the weight of what they'd learned about Derek had finally settled over them. The house, once filled with laughter, even if it was at my expense, felt eerily silent. The next morning, I left early for work. I needed to clear my head. The construction site was my sanctuary, a place where problems were tangible, where solutions could be measured and built with my own two hands. Out here, I didn't have to deal with Derek's lies or my family's betrayal. Out here, I could still build something solid. But even as I pored over blueprints and directed my crew, I couldn't escape the memory of Ethan's voice from the night before. I didn't know. I thought he was trying to help. When I got home that evening, Lauren was waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked worn, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail, her makeup absent for the first time in years. Her usual confident posture was replaced by slumped shoulders and shifting feet. We need to talk, she said softly. I set my bag down and leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. I'm listening. She didn't meet my eyes at first. I didn't realize how far this had gone. Derek, he made me feel like I mattered again. Like I wasn't just your wife or the kids' mom, but someone worth listening to. And I let it blind me. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. I didn't mean for it to get this bad, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't think he'd manipulate the kids. But Michael, you've been so distant for years. Always at work, always focused on the next project. I felt invisible. And you thought Derek would fix that, I said, my voice flat. She flinched. At first, it was just fun, a distraction. But then he started getting involved with the kids. And I thought, maybe he could give them the support you weren't. Support? I repeated, my tone rising. Lauren, he's a fraud. He wasn't supporting them. He was using them. Using you. Did you even think about what you were risking? What you were teaching Olivia and Ethan by letting him in? Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. I see that now, she said. I see everything now. And I'm sorry, Michael. I really am. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, my voice sharp. Do you even know how close we came to losing everything? Our money? Our kids' futures? While you were letting Derek play house, I was the one keeping this family afloat. She nodded slowly, wiping at her face. I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make it right. I want to fix this. I sighed, the anger in me simmering, but not boiling over. It's not just about us, Lauren. It's about Olivia and Ethan. They're watching everything we do, learning from our mistakes. This isn't just something we can patch over. It's a foundation we have to rebuild. The next day, I sat down with Olivia and Ethan. Lauren stayed upstairs, giving us space. They both looked nervous, as if they were expecting another lecture. But this time, I kept my voice calm. I know you feel like I haven't been around enough, I began. And you're right. I've spent too much time working and not enough time being here for you. But I need you to understand something. Everything I've done, every late night, every weekend at the office, was for you. To give you opportunities, to build a life for this family. Ethan looked down at his hands, and Olivia blinked back tears. I'm not asking for your gratitude, I continued, but I am asking for your trust. Because the things Derek promised you, they were lies. There are no shortcuts to success. No easy paths. Everything worth having takes work. And I want to help you see that. Olivia was the first to speak. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't realize. I didn't know he was lying. I know, I said gently. But now you do. And now we move forward. Ethan nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. What do we do now? The next few weeks were about picking up the pieces. I sat down with Lauren and Amanda to go over our finances, locking down every vulnerable account and ensuring the kids' college funds were secure. Derek's influence in our lives was erased piece by piece, though his shadow still loomed over the conversations Lauren and I had late at night. Lauren started seeing a therapist, and I focused on reconnecting with Olivia and Ethan. I took Ethan to the construction site on weekends, teaching him how buildings were made. Olivia helped me redesign a backyard shed, sketching out her ideas while I showed her how to bring them to life. They were small steps, but they were steps in the right direction. The final crack in Derek's armor came when Lauren received a call from one of his former business partners. He'd been caught in another scam, this time targeting investors in a luxury development project. The news spread quickly, tarnishing what little reputation he had left. It wasn't justice, but it was enough. One evening, as I was working in the garage, Ethan came in carrying a toolbox. He looked nervous but determined. Can I help? He asked. I handed him a pair of gloves and gestured to the workbench. Let's get to it. As we worked side by side, I felt something shift. The cracks were still there, but they didn't feel insurmountable anymore. Slowly, piece by piece, we were rebuilding. Months passed, and the dust finally began to settle. Derek was out of our lives for good. His arrest for fraud had been the final nail in his coffin, a public spectacle that turned the admiration my kids once had for him into embarrassment. Lauren, for her part, had taken steps to make amends, not just with me but with herself. But the damage couldn't be undone overnight. Trust, I realized, wasn't something you could rebuild as quickly as a new wall or a roof. It had to grow slowly, layer by layer, and sometimes the foundation had to be completely replaced before you could start again. It was a crisp Saturday morning when Ethan walked into the kitchen, dressed in work clothes and carrying the same toolbox I'd handed down to him months ago. His once manicured hands now bore the marks of honest labor, calluses from swinging hammers and splinters from rough wood. "Ready to go, Dad?" he asked. I smiled and grabbed my jacket. "Let's do it." We drove to the site where my crew was working on a new community center. Ethan had been helping out part-time, running materials, learning the trade, and picking up lessons in problem-solving. He wasn't just there for the paycheck anymore. He wanted to understand the process, to see how things were built from the ground up. When we arrived, Olivia was already there. She brought her sketchbook and had started drafting ideas for the interior design. She'd even spoken with a few of the project leads about how to make the space both functional and visually appealing. Watching her work reminded me of the shed we'd built together, her first real project, and the way her confidence had grown since. Lauren joined us later that afternoon. She'd been hesitant at first, unsure of her place after everything that had happened. But when she arrived with a cooler of drinks for the crew and saw Olivia and Ethan working side by side, Her face softened. Slowly, she was finding her way back to the family she'd almost lost. That evening, as the sun set over the site, we gathered around the makeshift picnic table my team had set up. Olivia showed us her sketches, explaining her vision for the community center's interior, while Ethan talked about the tools he'd learned to use that week. Lauren listened intently, chiming in now and then, her presence quieter but steady. For the first time in months, I felt hope. The following week, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I sat down with Lauren at the kitchen table, a thick envelope of papers in front of me. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, "about how I've been too focused on work. And you're right. I've spent so much time trying to provide for this family that I forgot to be part of it." Lauren's eyes widened, but she stayed quiet as I continued. "So, I've made some changes. I've hired a new project manager to take over some of my responsibilities. It means I'll be home more helping with the kids," and I hesitated before finishing, "working on us." Tears welled in Lauren's eyes, and she reached for my hand. "Michael, I didn't expect this, but thank you. I want to make it work too." Over the next few months, our family started to rebuild in earnest. Ethan officially joined my crew, splitting his time between working on-site and taking night classes in engineering. Olivia received her first acceptance letter from an art and design school, a testament to her growing talent and determination. Lauren began volunteering at the community center we were building. She worked with local families, teaching financial literacy classes, and helping others avoid the mistakes she'd made. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when old wounds resurfaced, but she was rebuilding too, one step at a time. One evening, as I was locking up the garage, Ethan walked in with a weathered photo in his hand. It was a picture of the tree house we'd built when he was a kid, our first project together. In the photo, a younger version of me stood beside him, both of us grinning with pride. "I found this in a box," he said, handing it to me. "Thought you might want it back." I took the photo, running my fingers over the edges. "You know, that tree house wasn't just for you. It was for me too." It reminded me why I started building in the first place. Ethan nodded, then hesitated. "You were right, Dad. About everything. Derek shortcuts all of it. I didn't see it back then, but I do now." I smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "I know you do. And that's what matters." The day we finished the community center, the whole family came to celebrate. Olivia took photos of the finished interior. Ethan gave a tour to the younger volunteers, and Lauren helped set up for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. As I watched them, I realized that the foundation of our family, though cracked and shaken, had been made stronger by what we'd endured. Later that night, as we sat around the dinner table, Olivia raised her glass. "To Dad," she said, smiling, "for teaching us that real success comes from building something real." Ethan lifted his glass too, and for giving us the chance to start over. Lauren's eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "To all of us," she said softly, "for rebuilding together." We clinked our glasses, and in that moment, I felt something shift. The cracks weren't gone, but they didn't matter anymore. What we had now was stronger than anything Derek or anyone else could ever take away. Years later, Olivia launched her own design firm, and Ethan became a licensed contractor, joining me at Carter Designs. Lauren continued her volunteer work, her classes now a staple of the community center. As for me, I finally found balance, a life where work and family coexisted, where I could build not just for others but with the people I loved most. The treehouse photo still hangs in my office, a reminder of where it all began. And every time I see it, I remember, no matter how deep the cracks, anything worth keeping can be rebuilt with the right foundation. Years later, Olivia launched her own design firm, and Ethan became a licensed contractor, joining me at Carter Designs. Lauren continued her volunteer work, her classes now a staple of the community center. As for me, I finally found balance, a life where work and family coexisted, where I could build not just for others but with the people I loved most. The treehouse photo still hangs in my office, a reminder of where it all began. And every time I see it, I remember, no matter how deep the cracks, anything worth keeping can be rebuilt with the right foundation.